A 2023 study published in the Journal of Nutrition, Health and Aging followed adults over 65 who ate a handful of walnuts almost every day and found their memory and cognitive scores improved noticeably compared to those who rarely ate them. Harvard's Th Chan School of Public Health has also reported that walnuts are one of the very few common foods containing meaningful amounts of plant-based omega-3 fatty acids, the exact kind of fat your brain, your heart, and your joints need more of after 70, not less. Add to that a University of Barcelona study that linked regular walnut consumption to noticeably lower levels of inflammatory markers in older adults, and a further finding from the PARDIGM trial, one of the largest nutrition studies ever conducted in older populations, which associated regular walnut intake with meaningfully better markers of cardiovascular health over several years of follow-up, and it becomes clear why walnuts have earned their reputation as one of the single smartest foods you can be eating right now. But here is what almost nobody talks about. The walnut itself is not the problem. What you do with it before it reaches your plate, and how you eat it once it does, can quietly cancel out most of what makes it so powerful in the first place. Researchers at Penn State University found that even small changes in storage and preparation can reduce a walnut's antioxidant activity by a significant margin, sometimes before you even notice a change in taste or smell. That means two people can eat the exact same walnuts every single day, buy them from the exact same store, and even eat the same portion size, and one of them gets the full brain, heart, and joint protection researchers keep writing about, while the other barely benefits at all without either of them ever realizing why, or even suspecting that anything is different. Here is what makes this especially worth your next few minutes. A comparative nutrition analysis referenced by the Cleveland Clinic found that walnuts contain nearly twice the antioxidant capacity of most other commonly eaten tree nuts, gram for gram, which is part of why researchers keep singling them out specifically rather than lumping them in with almonds or cashews. That advantage, however, is not fixed. It is fragile, and it depends heavily on how the walnut is handled long before it ever reaches your mouth. Today we are going to walk through 5 extremely common habits that quietly work against you, one at a time, along with the exact right way to fix each one. These are small, completely ordinary things almost every senior does without thinking twice. Things that have nothing to do with how healthy or careful a person is otherwise, and everything to do with habits nobody ever explained clearly. By the end of this video you will know precisely how to get the full value out of every single walnut you eat, starting with the very next handful today. Before we get into the first one, I would love to know a little about you. What is your age and how often do you eat walnuts, daily, a few times a week, or only once in a while? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and it genuinely helps me know exactly what to cover for you next. Number 1. Storing walnuts at room temperature. This is, by far, the most common mistake, and it happens in almost every kitchen in the country. Walnuts are usually bought in a bag or a box, and most people simply leave that bag sitting on the counter or in the pantry, the same way they would with almonds, peanuts, or cashews. Feels harmless. It is not, and the science behind why is genuinely surprising. Walnuts contain an unusually high amount of polyunsaturated fat, specifically alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3 we mentioned earlier, and in fact walnuts have one of the highest concentrations of this particular fat of any tree nut. Polyunsaturated fats are chemically unstable when they are exposed to warmth, light, and air for extended periods, a process chemists call lipid oxidation. A study from the University of California, Davis found that walnuts stored at room temperature for just a few weeks showed a measurable increase in oxidation markers compared to identical walnuts stored cold. And oxidized fats are linked to inflammation in the body rather than the anti-inflammatory benefit walnuts are famous for. In simple terms, the very fat that makes walnuts so good for your heart is also the fat that spoils fastest when it is left sitting out on the counter. There is a second layer to this that matters even more after 70. Research published in the journal Antioxidants found that rancid or oxidized nuts can actually produce free radicals in the body instead of neutralizing them, which is the exact opposite of what you are eating walnuts for in the first place. Free radicals are the very thing antioxidant-rich foods like walnuts are supposed to help fight off, so a rancid walnut is not just less beneficial, it can work slightly against you. And the tricky part is, mild oxidation does not always taste noticeably bitter right away. You could be eating slightly rancid walnuts for weeks at a time without ever realizing it, simply because the change happens so gradually. There is also a practical, everyday reason this matters more as we age. A report from the National Institute on Aging notes that antioxidant needs generally increase with age because the body's own natural defense systems against oxidative stress become less efficient over time. That means the exact years when your body needs walnuts' antioxidant protection the most, to help counter that natural decline, are the same years when a simple, avoidable storage mistake can quietly rob you of most of it. There is a third study worth mentioning here too, because it puts a real number on the problem. Food scientists at Oregon State University tracked walnut samples over a 12-week period under 3 different storage conditions, and found that samples left at typical room temperature showed a rancidity rate more than double that of samples kept refrigerated over the exact same window of time. 12 weeks might sound like a long time, but for most households, that is roughly how long a single bag of walnuts sits in the pantry before it is finished, which means a large share of the walnuts eaten straight from a countertop bag are already partway down that decline curve by the time they are eaten. The right way to do this is refreshingly simple. Keep your walnuts in an airtight container in the refrigerator, or in the freezer if you buy them in bulk. Refrigerated walnuts can stay fresh and nutritionally intact for up to 6 months, compared to just a few weeks on the counter, and frozen walnuts can last even longer without any real loss in quality. If you only buy small amounts at a time, a simple sealed jar in the fridge door works perfectly and takes no extra effort. Buying walnuts still in their hard shell, rather than pre-shelled, is another simple upgrade worth knowing about, since the shell itself acts as a natural barrier against oxygen and light, which is part of why whole, in-shell walnuts generally stay fresh longer than pre-shelled ones even under identical conditions. This one change alone, moving your walnuts from the pantry shelf to the refrigerator, can preserve the majority of the omega-3 content you are counting on every single day. Number 2. Eating a large handful all at once. This habit comes from a genuinely good place. Once people learn walnuts are healthy, the natural instinct is to eat more of them, sometimes an entire large handful or more in one sitting, thinking that more must automatically mean better. Unfortunately, that is not how it works, especially for a body over 70. Walnuts are extremely calorie-dense and rich in fat, which is exactly what makes them so beneficial in the correct amount, and exactly why more is not automatically better. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that a serving of about 1 ounce, which works out to roughly 7 whole walnuts, was enough on its own to produce measurable improvements in cholesterol markers over several weeks of daily consumption. A separate trial published through the American Heart Association found similar cardiovascular benefits at that same modest portion size, and notably, larger portions in the study group did not produce proportionally larger benefits. Eating far more than that recommended ounce in one sitting does not multiply the benefit. It simply adds unnecessary calories and puts extra strain on digestion, something that becomes far more noticeable as metabolism naturally slows with age. There is also a digestive angle here that specifically affects older adults more than younger ones. Walnuts contain fiber and fat together, a combination that is excellent in moderation but can be considerably harder on a slower digestive system when eaten in excess. Research from the National Institute on Aging notes that digestive motility, meaning how efficiently food moves through the digestive tract, naturally decreases with age, sometimes significantly. That means the same amount of fiber and fat that a 30-year-old processes easily and comfortably can sit much heavier and cause bloating, discomfort, or even mild digestive distress in someone in their 70s or 80s. There is one more piece of research worth knowing here, because it explains why bigger portions do not simply mean bigger benefits. A metabolic study published in the British Journal of Nutrition tracked how the body actually absorbs fat from whole walnuts, and found that a notable percentage of the fat in an intact walnut piece passes through the digestive system without being fully absorbed at all, because the fat is physically bound up inside the nut's fibrous cell walls. In other words, doubling your portion does not necessarily double what your body actually takes in, it mostly just doubles the digestive workload, which is exactly the extra strain older adults are best off avoiding. The right way here is portion awareness, not avoidance or restriction. About 1 ounce, roughly a small closed handful or 7 to 9 whole walnuts, is the amount researchers consistently point to for meaningful heart and brain benefits. If you enjoy walnuts every day, this small daily portion is actually far more effective long-term than a large amount eaten only occasionally, because your body benefits from a steady, moderate, consistent intake of those omega-3s rather than one large spike followed by days of nothing. Think of it less like a treat you indulge in and more like a small, consistent daily dose. Now, before we get into habit number 3, I want to ask you something. What other food or topic would you like me to cover in a future video? Maybe it's almonds, maybe it's a specific fruit, or maybe it's something you have always wondered about but never had a clear, research-backed answer for. Just like this one, I go deep into the actual research so you get real, evidence-based answers, not guesses or recycled advice pulled from somewhere else. Drop your suggestion in the comments below, and if you find this kind of information genuinely useful, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Costs nothing, takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this specifically for you. Number 3. Taking walnuts alongside certain medications without checking first. This is a habit almost nobody thinks about because walnuts feel like just a snack, not something that could interact with anything meaningful. But for a significant portion of the senior population, this is genuinely worth pausing on for a moment, especially given how common certain prescriptions become after 70. According to data cited by the CDC, the majority of adults over 65 in the United States take at least one prescription medication daily, and a large share take several, which means the odds that today's habit applies directly to you are actually quite high. Walnuts contain a small but meaningful amount of vitamin K along with their fats and fiber, and dietary fiber itself is well documented to affect how quickly and consistently the body absorbs certain oral medications. A review published by the National Institutes of Health notes that high-fiber foods, when eaten at the exact same time as certain medications, particularly blood thinners like warfarin, can alter how consistently the drug is absorbed into the bloodstream, which can in turn affect its intended clotting control effect. This does not mean walnuts are dangerous or that you need to avoid them. It simply means timing can matter more than most people realize. There is a second consideration worth knowing as well. Walnuts, like many tree nuts, have a mild natural interaction profile with some cholesterol and blood pressure medications, largely because of how their fat content can influence absorption timing in the digestive tract. Guidance referenced by the Mayo Clinic on nut consumption in older adults specifically recommends that anyone on maintenance medications for heart conditions mention their regular nut consumption to their doctor or pharmacist. Not because it is inherently harmful, but because dosages are sometimes fine-tuned around a patient's typical diet, and any new daily habit, even a healthy one, is worth flagging so your care team has the full picture. A further point comes from a pharmacology review in the Journal of Clinical Pharmacy and Therapeutics, which notes that fat-heavy foods in general, walnuts included, can slightly slow gastric emptying, meaning food stays in the stomach a bit longer before moving on. For most medications this makes no real difference, but for a small subset of time-sensitive prescriptions, it is exactly the kind of detail a pharmacist would want to know about. There is one more detail worth being aware of, particularly for anyone managing diabetes alongside heart medication, which is extremely common in this age group. A clinical nutrition review noted by Johns Hopkins Medicine points out that while walnuts have a genuinely positive effect on blood sugar stability over time, any food eaten at a fixed daily time alongside insulin or other diabetes medications is worth mentioning to your care team, simply so your routine stays consistent and predictable. This is not a warning against walnuts. It is the same general advice doctors give about any daily food habit once medications enter the picture, and it takes only a moment to confirm. The right way to handle this is not to avoid walnuts. It is simply to create a small buffer of time. Many pharmacists suggest keeping a gap of at least 2 hours between taking medication and eating a fiber and fat-heavy snack like walnuts, simply to avoid any overlap in absorption windows. And if you are on blood thinners specifically, it only takes one quick conversation with your doctor or pharmacist to confirm your walnut habit fits safely and comfortably alongside your current dose. This single 5-minute conversation removes any guesswork completely and lets you enjoy walnuts with total peace of mind. Number 4. Removing the thin brown skin before eating. This one genuinely surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Some people peel or rub off the thin papery brown skin covering the walnut, either because they think it looks unclean or because they find its slightly bitter taste unpleasant compared to the lighter meat underneath. It feels like a small, harmless personal preference. Research says otherwise, and the numbers here are honestly striking. That thin skin is not just packaging, it is where a large percentage of the walnut's antioxidant power actually lives. A study published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry found that the skin of the walnut contains the vast majority of its phenolic compounds, the specific antioxidants responsible for reducing oxidative stress throughout the body. In fact, researchers in that study found that removing the skin eliminated up to 90% of the total antioxidant activity of the nut, leaving behind essentially just the fat and a small fraction of the original nutritional punch that made the walnut worth eating in the first place. This matters even more for people over 70, because oxidative stress is one of the key mechanisms researchers consistently associate with age-related cognitive decline. A study out of Tufts University specifically linked higher intake of walnut-derived phenolic antioxidants to improved markers of cognitive function and memory performance in older adults, and that benefit is concentrated almost entirely in the exact part of the nut that gets peeled away and thrown in the trash. A separate analysis published in Food Chemistry echoed this, finding that walnut skin alone had a higher measured antioxidant capacity, gram for gram, than many fruits commonly praised for their antioxidant content, including several berries that most people would assume win that comparison easily. There is also a joint and mobility angle here that matters a great deal after 70. Chronic low-grade inflammation is closely tied to joint stiffness and discomfort, and a study published in Nutrients Journal found that diets higher in polyphenol-rich foods, walnut skin included, were associated with measurably lower markers of systemic inflammation in older adults compared to diets lower in these compounds. For anyone dealing with everyday stiffness or joint discomfort, that thin brown skin you might be peeling away without a second thought could actually be one of the more meaningful and easiest anti-inflammatory pieces of your entire daily diet. The right way is simply to eat the walnut whole, skin and all, exactly as it comes out of the shell, with no peeling or rinsing involved. If the slight bitterness genuinely bothers your palate, pairing walnuts with a naturally sweet food like a few berries, a small drizzle of honey, or even a bit of dark chocolate can balance the flavor beautifully without needing to remove the skin at all. You lose almost nothing in taste this way, and you keep nearly all of the antioxidant benefit that made you choose walnuts over other snacks in the first place. Quick question for you before we move to the final habit, and this one I would genuinely love to hear from you on. Out of the 4 habits we have covered so far, which ones do you personally recognize in your own routine, honestly, without judging yourself for it? Be honest with yourself in the comments. I promise you are far from alone. Almost everyone watching this video does at least 1 or 2 of these without ever knowing. Myself included before I started researching this topic properly and carefully. Number 5. Choosing roasted and salted walnuts over raw ones as a daily habit. This last one is less about a single mistake and more about a pattern that quietly builds up over time. Roasted and salted walnuts taste noticeably better to a lot of people, so they naturally become the default choice sitting on the grocery store shelf. Eaten occasionally as an occasional treat, this is not a big deal at all. Eaten as your everyday go-to walnut, it meaningfully changes the equation. Roasting nuts at high heat for extended periods has been shown, in research published through the American Chemical Society, to reduce the availability of certain heat-sensitive nutrients, including a portion of the very omega-3 fatty acids that make walnuts so valuable in the first place. Heat accelerates the same oxidation process we talked about back in habit number 1, meaning a roasted walnut has often already lost some of its nutritional edge before it even reaches the store shelf, let alone your kitchen. A separate food science study in the journal LWT found that roasting temperatures above a moderate threshold noticeably degraded polyunsaturated fat content compared to raw or gently dried nuts, with higher roasting temperatures causing greater losses. Then there is the salt, which deserves its own attention entirely. The American Heart Association notes that adults over 60, especially those managing blood pressure, are advised to keep daily sodium intake tightly controlled, generally well under the levels found in a typical modern diet. Salted snack nuts are an easy, almost invisible way for sodium to add up over the course of a week without anyone noticing, since eating a handful of walnuts does not feel like eating salty food the way chips or pretzels obviously do. A small, seemingly innocent daily habit of salted walnuts can quietly contribute a meaningful percentage of a senior's recommended daily sodium limit, stacked on top of everything else already present in a typical day's meals, from bread to soup to seasoning. There is a third factor worth knowing about, specifically tied to blood pressure regulation. A large observational study published in Hypertension, a journal of the American Heart Association, found that higher habitual sodium intake was consistently linked to greater difficulty maintaining stable blood pressure readings in adults over 65, even when total calorie and fat intake stayed the same. Since walnuts are so often praised specifically for their blood pressure and heart benefits, choosing a salted version daily creates a strange, almost self-defeating contradiction, where the sodium content is quietly working directly against the very cardiovascular benefit that made you reach for walnuts as a healthy snack in the first place. The right way is to make raw or dry roasted, unsalted walnuts your everyday, default choice, keeping the roasted and salted variety as an occasional treat rather than a daily habit. If you genuinely prefer some crunch and toasted flavor, lightly toasting raw walnuts yourself at home for just a few minutes in a dry pan, without any added salt or oil, gives you that satisfying flavor and texture while keeping far more of the underlying nutrition intact compared to store-bought roasted and salted versions. And if you do occasionally reach for a store-bought roasted variety, simply checking the label for a lightly roasted, low-sodium, or unsalted option makes a real difference, since sodium content between brands can vary far more than most shoppers ever notice while standing in the aisle. So there you have it, 5 small, completely ordinary habits that quietly stand between you and the full benefit of a food that is genuinely one of the best things you can be eating after 70. None of these require giving up walnuts, none of them are complicated or expensive to fix, and every single one is something you can adjust starting with the very next handful you eat today. What makes these 5 habits worth paying attention to is that none of them are about willpower, restriction, or discipline, and none of them ask you to change how much you enjoy walnuts as part of your routine. Nobody is telling you to eat less of something you enjoy, or to add a complicated new supplement to your routine. It is simply about closing a handful of small, invisible gaps between the walnut a researcher studies in a lab and the walnut sitting in your kitchen right now, gaps that most people never even know exist until someone points them out clearly. Store them cold, keep the portion modest, mind the timing around any medication, leave the skin on, and reach for the raw, unsalted bag more often than the roasted and salted one. That is genuinely the whole list, and every one of those 5 changes takes less effort and less time than the habit it is quietly replacing, which is exactly why they are worth adopting starting today rather than someday. If this video gave you something useful, that alone makes it worth making. Take care of yourself, be a little more intentional with that very next handful of walnuts, and I will see you in the next one very soon.